5 kids and a Labradoodle. Is that what contemporary lay holiness looks like? If it is not a metaphor, it might be a methodology. I get that phrase from a gentleman by the name of Larry Chapp. Larry Chapp is married to his wife Carmina. Larry was a theology professor, I believe, up at DeSales University in Allentown. Carmina was a professor at St. Charles Seminary. And if the name sounds familiar, it is because they are good friends of Deb Rojas, and Deb had both of them on to discuss the idea of sacred liturgy in a webinar a couple of months ago. And Larry was recently on a podcast called Clerically Speaking. Clerically Speaking is hosted by Father Harrison and Father Anthony. They are 2 priests, and on a weekly basis they kind of muse on things Catholic and relevant topics that are going on that either affect the Catholic Church or are directly involved by the Catholic Church around the world. And they were lamenting the fact that there was a phrase that came out of Vatican II called universal call for holiness, and that the idea behind the phrase really was never implemented, even up to today. So many people looked at the idea of holiness as the realm of priests and sisters and monks. And Larry says, no, it said the universal call for holiness, and there are a lot more lay people than there are priests and nuns and monks. And therefore, the idea of the universal call for holiness especially involves the laity and the secular realm in which they live and work. And so he said in that regards, the problem was that the priests and nuns and monks did not teach the laity what universal holiness looks like, or even on a practical level, what is it? How do you do that? What does it look like? How do you live that on a day-to-day basis? And so I give you a gentleman by the name of Trevor Williams. Trevor Williams is a dad married to the very fetching Jackie. And they have 2 children. And Trevor was recently interviewed on another podcast called The Pillar by a gentleman by the name of Ed Condon. Ed Condon and his Pillar partner J.D. Flynn are canon lawyers, and they look at what's going on in the Catholic Church, but from the point of view of canon law and rules and regulations and what ought to be done and what should be done. And Ed Condon is a massively interested baseball fan, huge Cubs fan. And he found that Trevor Williams, in addition to being a pitcher, currently for the New York Mets, don't hold that against him. He was traded to the Mets by Ed Condon's beloved Cubs. Trevor Williams is an incredibly dedicated Catholic. He met Jackie when they were young people in youth group, and even then he started to take his faith very seriously. Today he sees holiness as being achieved by 3 ways. One is to get Jackie's soul into heaven. Number 2, to get his children's soul into heaven. And number 3, to get his own soul into heaven. How do you do that? Trevor says a lot of that depends on what I do and what I say and how I carry myself, how I treat my spouse, the way I interact with my children, what I say and do when I am in the clubhouse or when I'm on the ball field. So in this regards, Trevor is just being what he is, trying to live out his vocation, trying to do his job, and do this in a way that somehow reflects his belief in Jesus Christ. He's a big fan of St. Benedict, has read the Rule of Benedict. He has IMDG, in Meorum Dei Gloria, tattooed on one of his arms. That is the motto of St. Ignatius. He's a big fan of Ignatian spirituality. He also has a tattoo of a lily on his other arm. Why? Because a lily is one of the symbols of Mary, but most especially it's associated with St. Joseph. And he has a great devotion to St. Joseph, being a dad, being a husband, etc. So what are we talking about? We're talking about doing what you do and being what you are, and that brings us back to this phrase from Larry Chapp. Larry was talking about holiness, and a dad that he knew says, "Look, Larry, I got 5 kids and a Labradoodle. How is that going to be a way for holiness?" And Larry said, "That's precisely the way to holiness. Treat the dog well, treat your wife well." Make sure that your kids are raised up in the faith. This is not complex, but this is very hard. When you do this on a regular basis, and Trevor has talked about this in the podcast, you are going to get pushback. You are going to get criticism. The powers of the world and the flesh and the devil are going to push back against you. But maybe this week it's something to consider. Look at your job, look at your vocation, look at the things that you do, not only for the church, but just within where you live and work and play. And see if the Lord says, let's take this one particular area, pray about that, and see if the Lord uses that very normal means to help you in your relationship with Christ and achieving that universal call to holiness.